All right, welcome everyone. My name's Josh Trought. I'm the director up at DAcres in Dorchester, New Hampshire. I was fortunate enough to be invited to the fair today by the folks that run the fair, the coordination committee. This is the second or third time I've been speaking, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy the fair tremendously. This is a tremendous place. So I'm thanking the fair for inviting me and having me speak. I'm also thanking the staff down at DAcres for making this all possible. It's sort of difficult to get away from the farm, and the staff is the ones that allowed this to all take place. We were fortunate, me and my partner Bree, to also ride bikes here from New Hampshire. And so we started on Thursday, and it was a really great ride. I'm sort of numb and tingly and sore all over, so if that comes across in my talk, I apologize. But the ride was fantastic. There was we went across the Kankamangas through the mountains. We saw moose, we saw eagles, we saw herons, we saw all kinds of critters, lots of porcupines crushed. We also went through some not so pleasant stuff. Went through the whole lakes regions, saw all the sacred lakes just filled up with second homes. I took some time to myself on a couple of those folks' porches to enjoy them myself a little bit. But overall, it's just sort of tough to go through that area and see the sacred lakes in the shape they are. And it's just sort of, a product of our society. So many abandoned sort of homes, and so much development, and so much of our economy going into that. Another thing I saw along the way is the deterioration of the food system. There was not a place on that whole 180 miles that I felt like I could stop and eat. Hot dogs, cheeseburgers, French fries, at pretty much every place you could stop. But you definitely you run the risk when you eat a convenience store burger. So it's really, you see a lot of deteriorated barns, you see a lot of overgrown homesteads, you see a lot of new houses in the middle of hayfields. Like they build their house in the middle of the hayfield so they have a nice lawn. Really weird stuff going on around America. But it seems like everybody's here now, so I should probably start talking about things other than my bike ride. In general, I have a sort of an improvisational style. I don't really have this whole click, next slide thing. In fact, we don't have any slides. So it's going to be a little bit of a surprise what happens here, even to me, which is good. I like that. I get out and speak a fair amount, and if I said the same thing every time, I think I'd be bored to death. So you come see me again, you see something different. Basically, the spiel today is going to be about an hour long. We're going to do, we're going to do about 2 to 5 minutes of intro to me, and then we'll do about 20 minutes about DAcres, what DAcres does, where I live and work, and then we'll close out with some ideas for the future, how to get things working in a more positive way. And then definitely we're going to have some time for a Q&A, so I'd like to open that up for discussion. So let me get started about me. I was born in 1971, the first Earth Day year. So my whole life has been full of the bad news, so to speak, of the Earth. It's been a long road of discovery. I went to college for environmental conservation, and the environmental conservation stuff that I learned was the depressing part. It was about the overpopulation, about the resource depletion, about the pollution, about the just the troubles in the world, so to speak. And there wasn't a lot in there about how to fix something. It was more just an assessment that the shit has hit the fan. And I graduated from college and was not uplifted. I was not put in a better mood. I did not feel like I had a purpose in life. Fortunately for me, I ran into this thing called permaculture. Permaculture is It's a school of thought. It's a school of design. I'll go over it briefly in a nutshell. The permaculture aspect is about holistic design, holistic ecological design. I really like it because it sends you towards your goals. It's design-based school with goal orientation. So if you figure out what you want, then you use the permaculture model to design for that. The wonderful thing about permaculture is it also has ethics. The three ethics, earth share, people care, and fair share, are wonderful ethics that all professions should have. You know, if every architect, when he was building a house, had to have those principles, those ethics in mind, I think we would have a lot more sustainable or thought-provoking housing than we do currently. The other thing that's great about permaculture is it has principles, abiding principles that help you base your design. And principles such as diversity breeds abundance. Principles such as capturing and storing energy. Principles such as mimicry of nature. So permaculture, to me, was really sort of a life changer. I really felt disempowered as a young person until I sort of learned about permaculture, and it gave me a lot of hope for the future. So picture me, 1997, 25 years old, 20 years ago, and sort of having this background where my parents were medical service professionals and had always encouraged me to be of service. That background also, it gave me a lot of entitlement and privilege. And so I was determined at that juncture to try to use that privilege and that entitlement and this knowledge of the human destruction of the earth to try to put myself to good use. And fortunately, at that juncture, I came into a piece of property. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the piece of property. So this is a regression or a sidetrack. You'll have to bear with me. The D in DAcres is for my Aunt D and Uncle Delbert. And the third D is Dorchester, where we live. It was going to be 3 DAcres, but that doesn't work, and neither does D cubed. So we just came up with DAcres, and we eventually came up with an acronym: Development Aimed at Creating a Rural Ecological Society. When we came to DAcres, my aunt was 89 years old. She had moved to the farm in the 1940s. They bought 200 acres of a hillside farm. It was a rundown farm that had originally been settled in the 1800s. You folks probably know the story of the settlement of New England. People rolled into Dorchester, into the mountains in the late 1700s. They tried 3 times to settle that land, to get their charter. On the 3rd attempt in 1784, they got the charter. The land is hillside, rocky, forest, northern forest. And the people that moved there were afraid of the forest, so they cut down all the trees. And they only really had the economy or the economic sense to do what they had learned before they immigrated to the States. So they came with the intention to be sheep farmers. And so this is a remedy for destruction. They came into the area with a preconceived notion of what the economy could be, and they destroyed the valuable natural resource, the northern forest. And so, the group of people that came there, the people that built, our original homestead, and are buried right down in the cemetery down the way, they had a rough time. The town, sort of grew with the development. It reached up about 1,200 people in 1850. But by the time my aunt and uncle moved there in 1940, there was only 90 people. So just consider this, within less than 100 years, the population went from 1,200, hey Rachel, to 90. This is a collapse of, just biblical extreme proportions. And the reason this happened is because they did not have a diverse economy. They destroyed their natural resource base. The Civil War took away a lot of the young people, and the war obviously cost money. And there was free land in Ohio, so everyone left. So when my aunt moved there in 1940, she was coming from the city. She'd been raised in New Bedford and was coming from Hartford, Connecticut. And she moved there without running water and electricity. And more or less, she had a tough time. She said she cried for the first 2 years. Just the rough social scene, not having any running water, not having electricity. The people that had stayed in Dorchester, those 90 folks that had stayed there, there's a reason they decided not to leave. And either they were entitled folks, or they were just folks that couldn't figure it out, how to get out of there. So she suffered a little bit from that transition. By the time I got there, she was well settled in. My uncle had predeceased her, and part of our motivation was to see that she was able to live the rest of her life out on that property. So we were there to help take her to the grocery store, and I drove her quite often to the hairdresser and that sort of thing. But she allowed us to come in and come up with this idea at DAcres. She allowed us access to land, which was critical. The farm, there's the old stone walls that are all throughout the farm, but it is not flat land. It is not a beautiful history of agriculture. The fertility is just not there. So it is a very marginal hillside farm. So when we moved there in 1997, it was me and my sister and a group of 3 other friends who'd been traveling around, wolfing and working at various farms. We moved to DAcres. We moved into the old barn. We moved there in September. We planted some garlic, and then things went south really quick. We'd been coming from places that were warm. We've been coming from places that had sort of like a social scene. We were looking to farm and be cheery, and we didn't realize that it was going to be 6 months of snow and ice. So we lost a good bit of the crew that first winter. We were living in a barn with a little pitcher pump from a hand-dug well, and we would do our dishes. Believe me or not, this is the truth. We would rinse our dishes with a ketchup bottle that was filled up with hot water. So we wash them in one bowl and then rinse them with a. This is how we were living, yeah. But we also had big plans. We wanted to do. We wanted to make a change, make a difference, to reach out and grab people and bring them into the hope and the possibility of this farming lifestyle. But the barn that we were living in was really tough for that. We're talking poor sanitation. Mice turds on the counter. We're talking really poor accessibility. So very difficult to get in and out of this space. So this is me leveraging my entitlement and my privilege. I say to my parents, wouldn't it be great if you guys pulled all that money out of the stock market and we built a community center? They're not here right now, but somehow they are on the grounds, and I'm glad they're not here right now so I can tell this story. They fell for this. Yeah. I was still in retrospect, I don't know really how we convinced them to do this, but we leveraged some assets, And we spent, a solid $350,000 over the next 3 or 4 years on building a multiplex. This is a picture of the multiplex.
Oh my God.
It's a community center for the rural. I have a hard time saying R's. Rural. I still can't say it. For the non-urban environment. This community center, the real basis of it is to create a farm that's a community place and an educational place. So what the nucleus of this farm is a commercial kitchen and a wood shop and overnight accommodations and event space. And those 3 components really provide the basis for what we do at DAcres. Let me take a step back and say one more thing about our formulation of DAcres. Our formulation of DAcres, coming there and living in that barn and being cold and being miserable taught us a lot about what our basic needs are. And what are, to sort of separate what our needs and our wants would be. And so we made some radical changes in like what we were eating. Because when we arrived there, we were eating chips and salsa, or let's just order some burritos, and then it just sort of was really easy for us to sort of be not true to the whole concept. And so I feel like fundamentally when we got down to the nitty-gritty, it was about addressing and assessing our needs versus our wants. And so within that, I'd like to just talk to that issue of needs and really defining that. We need as people, we need food and water, we need shelter, we need clothing, we need community, which provides us with education and mutual support. And one more thing, we also need access to medical care. And I'm going to throw one more in that I think is really sort of the icing on the cake, but I think this would probably be it in terms of needs, and that's travel. I think travel is essential for us as people to really get to know one another around this planet and to learn new ideas, share ideas, to exchange and progress. So, but what I'm saying is those needs have nothing to do with iPhones, have nothing to do with jet travel, have nothing to do with everybody having a single passenger vehicle type thing. But it really helped us in terms of establishing DAcres and getting to the nitty-gritty of what we want to do to create a livelihood. So we get there and we build this community center, and we're doing that work to create the place. We get the community center up, and then we start trying to mix it up with the public a little bit. We began using the community center for overnight visitors. We began using the community center for public events. So the public events that we have going, that we're pretty, it's we're like an element of the fabric of the Baker River Valley now. We've been there for 20 years, and these community events are something that people generally know about. They know about the first Sunday breakfast. They know about the Friday night pizza night. They know about potluck. They know about volunteer day. It's sort of this awareness, that we've raised through the years that gets people there for these various events. And the real awareness that we're trying to build, and I think the really difference that we make in doing so is we put the food in people's mouths. I think in general that's proven to us that is sort of the deciding factor in convincing people that all this stuff is worth it. To actually put the food in people's mouths in a comfortable atmosphere, the food that's directly from the farm or from the neighbors, it has vitality and flavor that people are just not used to in our society. Typically, the McDonald's or the restaurants or foods that has been frozen and shipped so many miles, it's you can't imitate it, the real thing. So by getting people into our environment, this is really, I think, how we're convincing folks of this, of what we need to do and what we want to do. So in general, the farming model that we're adopting is one more of this community center that has education outreach, it has food service capacity, and it also has the capacity to work with people who are interested in this lifestyle as residents and as volunteers. So we're really open to that sort of wolfing model where people are coming for 2 months, for 2 years to live and work at the farm and to experience this model. It is really also a fundamental change, so to speak, in how education is delivered. It's more of an apprentice-style model, and one in which it's a lot of the basis of how we're able to accomplish this. And what I'm getting at is the overall the farming model is a no-till forest garden model. So we're trying to shift away from typical row crops with a tractor running back and forth, over, tens or 20 or hundreds of acres. Instead, this is much more handwork, in which we're slowly transitioning from the existing northern forest, then building fertility, and looking to put in a forest garden, an edible Eden, so to speak, onto the landscape. So instead of the existing northern forest that you can't hardly eat much of, you're dealing with a transition to this edible forest garden model. And so we're growing lots of nut trees, lots of berries, lots of medicinal plants, lots of culinary herbs. We grow a lot of herbs for tea. And so within this model, the long-term evolution is to try to build a perennially based food system on this property.
And then the mimicking aspect?
The mimicry in this case is, the ecological basis up there. The tradition. What the land is suited for is forest. And so what we're trying to do is we come in and we use pigs to create an ecological catastrophe. Yeah, no, they're almost like a flood or a fire. But with fertility that comes in and just wipes out the existing vegetation. Because the northern forest just wants to grow right back. And then we'll come in and we'll cultivate, minimally, because it is sort of this no-till principle. And what we do is then, build fertility in an area and start planting our fruit and nut trees. But, when you plant a nut tree, you might pay $20 for a nut tree that's as big as your pinky. And it's not going to make you nuts of any quantity for 15 or 20 years. So you have to consider how you're going to deal with the understory of your orchard during that time. You can't let your pigs run wild in there anymore. You want to figure out different ways to grow annual crops and then transition into a perennial understory while those nut trees grow and get sizable. So all this transition takes a considerable amount of time. You cut the trees, put the pigs to it, you plan out the orchard, and then you really develop the fertility and the understory over many, many years. For me, at this juncture, I'm really trying to just gloss over the overview of DAcres and so forth. There's a lot more in this book. There's a lot more on the website. There's a lot more on the YouTube. There's a lot more on the Facebook. All that sort of stuff. I'm sorry, I have a hard time saying that word. But the idea is, it is a farm-based education center that's really trying to shift from just your standard nuclear family farm into something that we can look at as an intergenerational farm, where people don't necessarily have to be related, right? Probably everybody in this room has had experiences with the failure of the nuclear family. You know, somebody in this room has experienced divorce, or has parents or kids that have divorced. You get better odds in Vegas than you do with a marriage. Yeah? It's 50%. So how can we base our food system and our agricultural system on that model? I'm not saying people shouldn't get married, because they should. Okay?
Good.
When they get married, they should move to a farm that multiple married people can live on. Instead of us all just completely, every time we subdivide. We've been subdividing this country since we first got here, right? America is just continually to be divided. And so we know that these subdivisions are not, these landforms are not good agricultural or food production nodes. You know, when you go into a subdivision, you don't think this is going to be a great place to grow food. Right? It just doesn't work like that. But we all are very much dependent on food. So what I need to do at this point is sort of switch this talk from the DAcres to what the heck are we going to do? I know there was someone speaking yesterday about 50% of the food in New England comes from New England in 30 years. Is that right? She's saying 2050? But to me, we don't have time. We're sitting here trying to plug the dike of the fossil fuel catastrophe with protests. And what we need to be doing is figuring out ways to celebrate it and to show the joy and the love in it. And to figure out ways that we can collaborate and do this together. You know, I am a communalist. I'm very much a communalist. And in this country, 50 years ago, they were hunting people like me. You couldn't talk like this. It's against our religion in this country to talk like this, to talk about cooperation and communalism. So to me, really the nuts and bolts of it is we need to get back involved with our basic needs. We need to get a large portion of our population, not a large portion of our food coming from place, a large portion of the people involved in the food system. I gave a talk like this at No for New Hampshire conference over the winter, and I made the suggestion that everybody that eats chicken should at least at one point in their life kill a chicken. If you're going to eat it, why can't you kill it? And people were horrified. They didn't see that as being necessary. I can eat as much chicken as I want. I'd never have to kill one. And they want to argue about this. And that to me, we can't go on with this. We really have to find a way to say, you know, if we're going to set goals, why not 50% of the people being involved in agriculture? It's a big goal. That means that 1 out of 2 people born becomes a farmer. That means 1 out of 2 people graduating from high school is a farmer. And that means even more, 1 out of 2 people graduating from college, higher education, in farming. This is really what's got to happen. And we have to figure out how to make it so that people can then have a place to learn and craft their skills. So I have a proposal. You know, I've been thinking about this stuff because I was on, unless you might have missed this, I was on the road from New Hampshire bicycling to get here. so I had a lot of time to think about what I was going to say and what I think we should do. And I really think that 1 out of 2 people become farmers, and we figure out how to share the land. There is so much land out there that is underutilized that could be used for farming. How do we get people on this land? And I think a lot of this has to be places such as DAcres that invite people to come learn the practices and share in the work. It's just got to be this way. In terms of alternatives, our alternatives are running out. I think we need to be very proactive in this. If I could find my page, I'd probably have more stuff. The proactive in this and forthright. We've spent the last 30 years creating a global economy. So we could get cheap stuff from far away. What we need to do is reverse this trend and get valuable stuff from close. We need to figure out a way. We've removed all these tax barriers on imports. We've made it so that transportation is just hyper easy. We need to figure out just a way to turn around, make that transition. This is going to be very difficult. And it reminds me a lot of when my aunt moved to New Hampshire. People are going to cry for a long time over this one. We're living in a state of luxury. I thought about that every car that passed me on the way to the fair. It's coming so super easy that we can press a pedal down and move a 2,000-pound car at 55 miles an hour. It's not reality. We need to wake up to that reality. For me, I'm looking at this whole transition, and like our culture is based on tradition, and our culture is based on sort of, it's not common sense, it's just sort of the trajectory of history and money. And so I think what we need to do is take a real long assessment to that. And one of the ideas that I came up on with this bike ride is, why don't, instead of the current system, why don't we allow everyone 13 to 30, this is just a suggestion, because I'm being bold, 13 to 30, we give them all bicycles. And we tell them to ride wherever they like. They can travel for as long as they like. Go to the next farm down the road. And then when you're about 30, come back if you choose. It'd just be a whole different model for society. So instead of, you're wondering, well, where's the help coming from in the spring? Somebody rolls right into your yard, pedals right in. That kind of fabric in which people were able to move around freely and work freely for room and board and for experience.
So do you think the country's going to have to go belly up broke so that can happen? Because that's what's going to get them on their bikes, right? They have to get somewhere to get something that they need.
Well, unfortunately, I think the situation right now is our exploitation is coming so easy. The price of gas is staying low because we're willing to war on other people to make it so. And we're willing to continue to exploit our resources to make it so. What will it be? Will it be the destruction of the economy or the destruction of our health? I mean, go to the grocery store and walk around. The people in there aren't healthy people. We're not treating ourselves as we should. I do have something I'd like to share with you. Is the Scott Nearing influence on me is very strong. My father over there, that's him. Yeah, he's the guy that's cringing. He gave me The Good Life, the Scott Nearing book, when I graduated college. And it was at that time where I really was super depressed. I was depressed for this whole planet. And the Nearing's work has really positively influenced me as permaculture has. So I'd like to just read an excerpt. This is, Scott Nearing wrote a bunch of books, yeah? And some of them were better than others. And some of them are pretty boring. But he's got some great quotes, and I'd like to share this one with you. If, as we have been assuming in this discussion, now remember this was written in 1950, Western civilization is dying, we must treat the event as we treat the death process elsewhere. That is, we must separate ourselves psychologically from the old and dedicate ourselves enthusiastically to the new. If, as thinkers are saying nowadays, the Western world is in the grip of the death-birth process, if one epoch is drawing to a close and its successor is taking form, Western man faces three major tasks. The first is learning to live with crisis. The second is to behave as though the death of the old order were imminent. The third is to hope, plan, and struggle for the birth and growth of the new order. Since no two social systems are identical, and in view of the far-reaching inventions, discoveries, and developments which have dominated the life of the past 2 or 3 generations, it must be evident that in this instance, the social order of tomorrow will be strikingly different from that of yesterday. The planning, building, and organization of the new order will involve a large measure of pioneering. The good life is a pilgrimage. In a dying civilization, it may lead the seeker along a rough and thorny trail through broken, unexplored country in search for his good life universal. So to me, that really gets at the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do up at DAcres at this farm enterprise. It is really about trying to break new ground. It is really about trying to try things that might not work. Just to try them. Because as Scott Nearing said, 50 years ago, this Western world is dying. And its death is imminent. It's going to happen. We need to seek alternatives today. And it's got to be the type of thing where we bring it to people's attention, not out of fear, but rather the revelation that the good food brings the good life, brings the good health. So all this is coming together in such a way that it's positive. This transition is positive. It's for the better of all of us. If only I could share with people, my peers that I grew up with, that I'm out of touch with. People who have desk jobs, who are tied to their credit, who are tied to their technology, and just try to free them. My life does not have those distractions. So I do have to get on Facebook occasionally, but it's really a much simpler, much purer, much full of joy, much full of happiness and health. And I really, really, truly, I'm searching for a way to share that knowledge with others. Where we've been most fortunate at DAcres in doing that is, once again, putting it in their mouths. And if we have long enough, if we can keep them there for a long enough period of time, then I think they really begin to get the connection with place and the connection with each other. They can really build a new society for us, a new culture of place, a new culture of people, a culture of sharing. That's my goal.
The population is supposed to double in the next 40 years.
The population of the world.
Yes.
So you're worried about feeding people. I think every healthy individual between 0 and 50 can contribute to the food system in a positive way. I think that the problem is the population is doubling and it's urbanizing. We have the mega cities, we have the megalopolises, but we also have large tracts of lands that are unutilized. So my answer to that is to retake the commons. That's a very scary thing for lots of people, landowners, politicians, police. The government is scared of us talking about taking back the commons. But literally, the commons are ours every moment we breathe. Every drop of water that we drink is common property. How could it be any different? So I think that's really where we need to get back to the nitty-gritty, is learning to share. And yes, population control is a huge issue. You know, how do we manage that? I think security for our own concern, for our future, is what drives a lot of people to have children. And, there's sex is fun too, so, you need some birth control.
Food. There you go. Water.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Nancy Chandler. I've farmed in Monmouth for 10 years, taught apprentices who would stay 2 to 6 months to farm, talk about food systems, and the greatest gift of the joy of doing this lifestyle is the connection to the plants and animals and place and neighbors, cooperating with those neighbors around you. Monmouth is still an agricultural town, so they one dairy, several orchards. People would help me put the plastic over the top of my greenhouse, or loan equipment, or teach me about equipment. So you mentioned this connection to place and to community is a great joy there. And I would agree, I love your vision of 50% of us learning to help produce what we eat, even if it's weekend retreats somewhere. But don't exclude gardeners, because most of the 20 young people who came and worked with me are not going to become farmers. 1 or 2 might, but they all could be gardeners and food policy people. So thank you for your vision, and let's keep building it in each community. And Maine is the most rural state in the country. 61% of us still live in the country. We are rebuilding our rural communities. But get on a piece of land somewhere and grow something.
Yeah, I think that's the real message. Get on that land and share it. It's not yours. You're going to be gone. You're going to be dead. You're going to be dust. Share it. Find ways to give it on. Pay it forward.
Can you go into that a little more? How do you?
Okay, so the model we're trying to develop right now is in process. I don't fully have the answer on how to share land. Right now, we're using the current structures that we have at our disposal. The 501c, we're running a nonprofit entity, community service entity. So the community service entity runs the farm. And so we are able to do community outreach through that. We're able to, help set up like a local foods guide. We're able to hire a community liaison to go into the elementary school. She's in the back of the room, by the way. We're able to use the nonprofit entity as a service organization. And that nonprofit entity also pays employees. It also feeds and houses. It provides the basis. Into the future, we'd like to figure out a mechanism that we could not necessarily have ownership on paper, but what ownership implies. Security for you, nobody can kick you out. And decision making. That to me is ownership. if you can make decisions and nobody can kick you out, that you have security on that land, you are a de facto owner. And so that's the mechanisms that I feel like we need to utilize to create these enduring communities, is to give people the power to make the decisions and give them the power of tenancy. I think that is de facto ownership.
So, my wife and I traveled from the northwestern corner of Colorado, very, very rural, very much ranch. Wild West, we deal with, lack of water rights, lack of surface rights, BLM writing, oil and gas contracts. That sovereignty over food production, land management, it's a battle. It's a battle because, in very sparsely populated parts of the country, there's not a lot of we came here, frankly, to be inspired by the land, because we all got it going on. But back home, and I don't even dare bring up the grain belt in the Midwest, which is all just industrial GMO corn. Your thoughts on? I set you up. That's a tough question. Your thoughts?
I think we need to occupy the land. I think if we get people out of the cities into areas where they can maintain their own resilience, their own independence, from their own firewood, from their own water sources, then that becomes much more valuable to us as a people. When everyone's in the city and depends on the exploitation of the commons for their survival, they have no resilience, they have no independence. And so I think at some level we have got to chop out the thirst, the greed, the hunger that's coming from those cities, and distribute ourselves across the landscape a little bit more adequately, so that we can provide for ourselves instead of depending on exploitation, instead of depending on goods from far, far away. So, the title of this talk is "Farming is the Answer," and that's basically how I'm trying to live my life, as if this is the crucial issue of our times. And so, for me, I think it's fundamentally important that we all sort of get into that mindset and become advocates in different ways, either through sharing the information, sharing the land, sharing your experiences. We all have to step it up and become these educators of our society, especially if you've had those experiences where you feel the passion, where you've tasted the freshness and the vitality and the nutrition. Become an advocate. Stress it to your friends, your family. Leverage their resources. Do what needs to be done. Time is running out. I don't even know what time it is.
I have some land. I have a very similar vision of what you're doing. It's mostly woods, so it's not farmland. You want to get young people on there. About 30 acres, not big. So I wonder what your thoughts are on seeding and propagating what you're doing at DAcres.
So, when we started out, we would just put up flyers at the health food stores and stuff. Say, we're trying to experiment. Come on out, see what you think.
See, I don't live on this piece of land. That's the other problem. It's like an hour from where I live. It's difficult to manage it.
Yeah, I think that's still a possibility. What you'll be looking for is a core group of people, or potentially a manager or someone with some tenure and some interest, and then you need to be able to say, look, I give you 5 years or 10 years, you can live here for, you need to be able
shared equity.
Yep, throw it out.
Just like,
Yep. So be willing to share
yeah.
and be willing to compromise.
And then maybe it could be like a land trust.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
All
only
these
after
are
I get people on the land, so it's a working system.
housing. Housing is crucial.
One trailer.
And it's hard to get people to live more than 1 year in a treehouse. I tried. They just need a little bit more than that. So, yeah. Just trying to upgrade it as you go. Trying to make it as appealing as possible. Trying to meet their needs. Trying to meet them halfway. Running water. People love that stuff.
How about profit sharing? Because I'm feeling like without that sense of place that you were discussing, like when you own something, your independence is
Yeah, it's
increased.
more like a partnership.
Yeah, if
The
there's a
land
partnership
and
involved, I
somebody
think you would succeed.
Yeah.
I've got an idea of what the land is capable of, so I need people to
Don't stop. Just don't stop. Keep going where you're going, man. Seriously, you're on the right track, and I think your conscious is. All of our activities are driven by these motivations, and once you can get there, once I can figure out how to make DAcres completely public, and I can step away and be happy. Oh, baby, this is just a wonderful thing.
It's like leaving a legacy.
Absolutely. And what we need to think about as people is we are continually leaving that legacy. Each generation, as we move forward, we need to be planting more trees. We need to be putting the fruit and nut trees in the grounds for the generations to come. Every single one of us.
I wish I knew about Korean stone pine 20 years ago.
There you go. Said pine nuts.
And pine nuts?
That was my question. When you're doing the permaculture, so you got your hogs, right? And you've gotten the earth ready. And are you moving stones out of the way?
Okay, so in terms of no-till and so forth, no-till for us doing handwork is primarily a principle. Like we're using forks for most of our cultivation, and we're trying not to double dig or flip soil. But yeah, if there's a rock there, we dig it out and we move it.
So you're moving that.
And definitely, when you're weeding, you end up turning soil over.
Yeah.
But it's more of a principle. And the principle, once again, to amplify it further, is to use plants for fertility. So these dynamic accumulators throughout your landscape are really important. The concept of being able to pull nutrients from, say, 4 to 5 to 6 feet in the ground by just using herbaceous plants as dynamic accumulators is crucial. So like when you see a comfrey plant and the vibrancy and the vitality of a comfrey, you got to understand that's coming from way deeper than we could ever access with a rototiller. That sort of thing. Yes, sir.
I'm fortunate about Newark, New Jersey transplant. Unfortunately, I have over 200 acres. And in general, I think we need to protect land from the next generation, like children. So I'm in the process of getting everything under some kind of conservation easement, so it can't be divided.
Prevent subdivision. This the easements. It's sort of a double-edged sword because it can also prevent necessary developments that you're sort of ruling from the grave. And so I have a little hesitancy at that.
Me too.
You? How you doing, Tim? There's these various schools of thought in terms of conservation easements, and the danger of it is we're putting all these easements and these land trusts into the hands of suits. Yeah?
Yeah.
Ultimately, lawyers are going to be deciding the future of your land. Because you get like an easement or a trust that has these clauses in it, the next owner that comes along, he's going to try to break those. And then they're going to end up in court. This is 5, 10, 15 years down the road. They're trying to build insurance packages to cover all this, to make sure that they have adequate funds to cover the lawyers that will come, but it just seems like if you're preparing for lawyers that will come,
Yeah.
something's wrong here. It's not a totally tight system.
So then what do you think about Maine Farmlands Trust Forever Farms?
You know, I'm not sure of the particulars.
Forever Farms.
I'm not sure of the particulars of that specific program, but I am concerned with the limitations that we cannot foresee the future. And so if we put too many...
I'm going to go give a talk, bro.
Look, you see, Jim. I'm giving a talk right now.
I got to go get one before yours is over.
Okay, we'll catch up.
Okay.
Alright, but unfortunately it does seem like it is sort of winding to a close here. I'll take one more question, and I'll be willing to talk to whoever wants to talk to me forever. You can always call me, email me, come to my house, figure out where I live. It's not hard.
I was wondering about your no-till principle. Would that exclude also the one-time use of, say, heavy equipment to create terraces that would last for hundreds if not more years?
Okay, let's just get... there's people here that are laughing in the front row that work with me, because I own a 43,000-pound excavator. Yeah, ponds, terraces. I'm burning fossil fuels today to try to create a landscape for the next 50,000 years. Yeah, it's definitely something that...
Making war?
What is that?
Instead of making war, you're making terraces. Okay.
That's we got the excavator from a guy who was developing property in the North Country in New Hampshire. He was going in and buying property and putting in roads and subdivisions. So we rescued the excavator. And now we're building, yeah, it's a true story. We're building ponds and terraces with it. It's a wonderful thing. But yes, no-till is a principle. It's a concept. It's the way that we're building soil for the future from the top down. But yeah, we dig. We make messes. We try to fix them. We try to clean it up. One more.
Well, so you're using the excavator, and the excavator comes from
John Deere.
What we do these days. And so you're saying you're going to use it now, but let it die?
It's heading that
Technology,
way.
man.
It's heading that way. I don't foresee... You know, I'm living on the vestiges of the last generation's wealth. You know, the $30,000 that paid for that excavator came from the stock market stuff that, you know, my parents had built up in the 70s and the 80s. And no, you know, no one's got that kind of... Not everyone has that privilege or entitlement. What I'm trying to do...
People around here do.
No. What I'm trying to do is share that. Share that while I have it.
Get that. A lot of people get that. New England's got a lot of...
There's a lot of wealth in this country, absolutely. Yeah, well, let's redistribute it. Let's use it for the right things. I think that's the goal. That's sort of finding, instead of going up to northern New Hampshire and putting in subdivisions, let's build terraces and ponds and a food system. And it's sort of a choice on an existing piece of equipment.
Got about 2 minutes left.
That's it, 2 minutes. Anyone else want to get riled up? That's really what I came to do my talk today about. Get people riled up, get people like sort of fired up thinking about this stuff. You know, this is really where we got to get this discussion going. It can't be meek, it can't be mild, it can't be I wish I should have. Let's do this stuff. Wake up! Let's get everybody going! All right, she's ready. How are you guys be? Come on.